I was sitting in my kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at my grandson's TikTok account, watching my son party on a yacht in Miami, while I'd just sent him my last $3,000 for his depression medication. The blue light from my phone burned my tired eyes, but I couldn't look away from what I was seeing. There was Blake, my 45-year-old son, who had called me sobbing just 3 days earlier about how he couldn't afford his therapy sessions, now clinking champagne glasses with his wife Tiffany on what looked like $1 million boat. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. The kitchen felt impossibly quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own shallow breathing. I kept thinking this had to be some kind of mistake, maybe an old video, or something Austin had gotten confused about when he showed me his dad's secret account. But the timestamp said 2 days ago, 2 days after I had transferred money from my savings account because Blake told me he was having a mental breakdown and needed help paying for his medications. I scrolled down and saw more videos. Blake showing off designer shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Tiffany filming their dinner at some fancy steakhouse, laughing about how the appetizers alone were $80. Another video of Blake getting a massage at what looked like a luxury spa, talking about treating himself after a successful week. Every single post felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Hey, beautiful soul. Before we dive in, show some love with a like, tap subscribe, and tell me, where in this big, beautiful world are you watching from? The worst part wasn't even the money, though Lord knows I had been dipping into my retirement savings more and more often to help him. It was remembering his voice on the phone, how broken he sounded when he called me crying about his depression, how he said he felt like such a failure and didn't know how he was going to make it through another day. I had stayed up nights worrying about him, praying he wouldn't do anything to hurt himself. I had even called his wife to check on him, and Tiffany had played along perfectly, telling me how concerned she was about Blake's mental state. As I sat there in my dark kitchen, still in my nightgown with my gray hair uncombed, I realized I wasn't just looking at evidence of my son's lies. I was looking at proof that the child I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for after his father died, saw me as nothing more than an easy target, a foolish old woman who would believe anything and hand over money without question. That's when I knew my life was about to change forever. To understand how I ended up being played for a fool at 72 years old, you need to know the story of Blake and me. When my husband Robert died of a heart attack 30 years ago, Blake was only 12 years old, and I became everything to that boy. Father, mother, best friend, and biggest supporter, all wrapped into one grieving woman who was determined not to let her son suffer, because life had dealt us a terrible hand. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after Robert's death. During the day, I was a secretary at the local insurance office, and 3 nights a week, I cleaned offices downtown. Blake never knew about the second job, because I didn't want him to feel guilty or different from his friends. While other kids complained about their parents being too strict, Blake got away with everything, because I couldn't bear to be the heavy after he'd already lost his dad. Looking back, maybe that was my first mistake. I put Blake through college, paying every cent of his tuition at the state university, because I didn't want him starting life with debt. When he graduated and decided he wanted to start his own marketing business instead of getting a regular job, I supported that too. I helped him with the down payment on his first house when he married Tiffany 8 years ago. When Austin was born, I was the grandmother who showed up for every school play, every baseball game, every birthday party with expensive gifts, because I wanted my grandson to have everything his father and I never could afford. Blake had always been what people called sensitive. Even as a child, he would cry easily and needed more comfort than other kids. As an adult, he would call me whenever things got stressful at work or in his marriage. I felt proud that my son trusted me enough to share his problems, that even as a grown man with his own family, he still needed his mother. When he started calling more frequently over the past 2 years, telling me about his struggling business and his depression, it felt natural to step in and help. The calls always followed the same pattern. Blake would phone late at night, his voice thick with tears, talking about how overwhelmed he felt. He'd mentioned therapy sessions he couldn't afford, medication costs that were breaking him, business expenses that were crushing his spirit. He never directly asked for money at first. Instead, he would just talk about how hopeless everything seemed, how he didn't know how he was going to make it through another month. Of course, I would offer to help. What mother wouldn't? I started small, sending $500 here and there for what he called emergency therapy sessions. Then it became $1,000 for medication adjustments his insurance wouldn't cover. The amounts grew larger as his stories became more desperate. A $2,500 payment for a intensive therapy program that was supposedly his last hope. Another $3,000 for business equipment he needed to keep his company afloat so he could afford his mental health treatment. I never questioned any of it because Blake was my son, my baby who had grown up without a father, and I had spent 30 years making sure he never went without anything he needed. But sitting in that dark kitchen, staring at videos of him living like a millionaire, I realized that somewhere along the way, I had raised a stranger. The weekend Austin came to visit started like any other. My 16-year-old grandson had been staying with me every other weekend since he got his license, partly because he enjoyed the freedom of my house, and partly because I think he genuinely liked spending time with his grandmother. Austin was a good kid, nothing like the entitled teenager you might expect from the way his parents were actually living. We were sitting on my couch Saturday evening after dinner, and Austin was trying to teach me about social media. "Grandma Dot, you really need to get on TikTok," he said, scrolling through videos on his phone. "There's some really funny stuff on here." I had always been curious about these apps the younger generation was obsessed with, so I told him to show me how it worked. Austin was flipping through videos of dancing teenagers and cooking tutorials when suddenly his face went pale. "Oh crap," he muttered, quickly trying to scroll past something. But I had caught a glimpse of a familiar face on the screen. "Wait, honey, go back. Was that your dad?" I asked, reaching for the phone. Austin looked like he'd been caught stealing cookies. "Grandma, it's nothing, just some stupid video." But his obvious panic made me more determined to see what he was hiding. "Austin, let me see that phone," I said, in my no-nonsense grandmother voice. Reluctantly, he handed it over, and I managed to navigate back to the video that had made him so uncomfortable. There was Blake, my son, who had called me crying just 4 days earlier about not being able to afford his antidepressants, standing on the deck of a gleaming white yacht. He was wearing a shirt that looked like it cost more than my monthly electric bill, holding a glass of champagne, with the Miami skyline sparkling behind him. The caption read, "Living my best life, thanks to these rich kid hacks." My heart started pounding as I watched Blake laugh and gesture grandly at the luxury surrounding him. But it got worse. I accidentally clicked on his profile and found dozens of videos I never knew existed. Blake had apparently been documenting his lavish lifestyle for months, under a username I never would have connected to him. Video after video showed my depressed and struggling son living like a celebrity. Designer shopping sprees, where he casually bought $400 sneakers. Dinner at restaurants where a single meal cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. A video of him and Tiffany at some exclusive spa, talking about their mental health day that probably cost a fortune. But the video that destroyed me was one from 3 weeks ago. Blake and Tiffany were sitting in what looked like a high-end bar, clearly several drinks in, and they were laughing about something on Blake's phone. "You should have heard my mom on the phone yesterday," Blake was saying, putting on a mock-serious voice. "Oh, Blake, honey, of course I can help with your therapy costs. You just focus on getting better." Then his real voice came back, full of cruel amusement. "I swear, boomers will believe anything if you just sound sad enough." Tiffany was giggling like a schoolgirl. "Your Oscar-worthy depression performances are paying for this entire vacation," she said, raising her martini glass. "Here's to easy money and guilt-tripping mothers." Austin was watching my face as I absorbed what I was seeing. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't know you didn't know about Dad's account. He told me it was just for fun videos and not to mention it to you because you wouldn't understand TikTok." I sat there holding that phone, watching my own son mock me to strangers on the internet, and I felt something inside me break and rebuild itself all at once. The sweet, sensitive boy I had sacrificed everything for had been playing me like a violin, and he thought it was hilarious. After Austin went to bed that night, I sat alone in my living room with his phone still in my hands, scrolling through months of Blake's secret life. Each video felt like a physical blow. I kept thinking I would reach the end, that surely there couldn't be more evidence of his deception. But the content just kept going. Videos of expensive wine tastings, luxury hotel stays, shopping sprees at stores I couldn't even pronounce the names of. The worst part was how I started remembering every conversation we'd had over the past 2 years with this new, horrible context. 3 months ago, when Blake called me sobbing about needing money for a specialized therapy retreat. I had actually considered taking out a loan against my house because my savings were running low. I remembered lying awake that night, worried sick about my son's mental health, praying that this expensive treatment would finally help him find peace. Now I was looking at videos from that exact same weekend, showing Blake and Tiffany at a luxury resort in Napa Valley, laughing about the amazing wine selection, and posting stories about their spontaneous romantic getaway. The specialized therapy retreat had been a couple's vacation funded by my retirement money. I got up and walked to my kitchen table, where I kept my checkbook and bank statements. With shaking hands, I started going through the records, cross-referencing dates with Blake's TikTok posts. The pattern was sickeningly clear. Every single time I had sent him money, there was a corresponding video showing him spending it on luxuries within days. The $1,500 I sent for emergency therapy sessions in January had paid for his and Tiffany's weekend ski trip to Aspen. The $2,000 for medication adjustments in March had funded their anniversary dinner at a restaurant where the tasting menu alone cost $300 per person. The $3,000 I had just sent for his depression medication had apparently been used for their Miami yacht party. I added up the numbers, and my hands started trembling so badly, I had to put the pen down. $24,700. Nearly $25,000 of my retirement savings. Gone. Money I had earned by working 2 jobs for years after Robert died. Money I had saved by clipping coupons, buying generic brands, and skipping vacations so I would have security in my old age. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing how stupid I had been, how easily manipulated, how Blake had studied my weaknesses and exploited them with surgical precision. He knew exactly how to make his voice sound broken over the phone. He knew that mentioning his father's death would make me feel guilty and protective. He knew that talking about suicide or mental breakdowns would make me panic and offer money immediately. I thought about all the nights I had stayed awake worrying about Blake, all the prayers I had said, asking God to help my son through his depression. I remembered calling my sister in tears, asking her to pray for Blake too, because I was so afraid he might hurt himself. I had even researched depression support groups and considered asking Blake if he wanted me to attend meetings with him. The cruelest part was that Blake had involved Austin in his deception. My grandson, who I loved more than anything, had been watching his father manipulate and mock me for months. Austin's uncomfortable expression when he showed me the videos wasn't just embarrassment about social media. It was the look of a child who knew his father was doing something wrong, but didn't know how to stop it. As the sun started coming up, I was still sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by bank statements and printed screenshots from Blake's TikTok account. I felt like I was grieving the death of someone who was still alive. The son I thought I knew, the sensitive boy who needed his mother's protection and support, had never existed. In his place was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a convenient ATM, with emotional buttons that were easy to push. But as the morning light filled my kitchen, something else was growing alongside the grief and humiliation. It was anger, pure and cold and clarifying. For the first time in my life, I was truly angry at Blake. And it felt like waking up after a long, drugged sleep. The anger gave me clarity I hadn't felt in years. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, I decided to find out exactly how deep Blake's deception went. I started by going through every piece of paperwork he had ever asked me to sign. And that's when I found the folder that made my blood run cold. 6 months ago, Blake had come over with a stack of official-looking documents, explaining that he was worried about my health and wanted to make sure someone could help me if I ever became unable to manage my affairs. "It's just a precaution, Mom," he had said, in that caring voice I now recognized as completely fake. "You're getting older, and I want to make sure you're protected." The power of attorney documents were more extensive than I had realized. Blake hadn't just positioned himself to help with my medical decisions. He had legal authority to access my bank accounts, sell my property, and make financial decisions on my behalf if he could prove I was mentally incompetent. The papers were professionally prepared and notarized, which meant Blake had planned this manipulation for months. My hands were shaking as I read through the legal language, but the implications were crystal clear. If Blake could convince a doctor or a court that I was developing dementia or becoming mentally unfit, he could take control of everything I owned. My house, my savings, my late husband's pension, everything. That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. Last month, my neighbor Betty had mentioned running into Blake at the grocery store. He seemed so worried about you, Dorothy, she had said. He told me he's been concerned about your memory lately. Said you've been repeating yourself and getting confused about things. I had been puzzled by that conversation because I hadn't been having any memory problems. But I had dismissed it as Blake being overly protective. Now I realized he had been laying groundwork, planting seeds of doubt about my mental competence with people in my community. I grabbed my laptop and started taking screenshots of every single one of Blake's TikTok videos, making sure to capture the dates and captions. I printed bank statements showing every transfer I had made to him. I created a timeline matching his requests for money with his social media posts, showing how he had actually spent it. As I worked, I discovered that Blake's TikTok account had thousands of followers who knew him as some kind of lifestyle influencer. He regularly posted money tips and life hacks that were basically instructions for manipulating older relatives. One video was titled "How to Get Emergency Cash from Family" and included advice about using emotional triggers and playing up mental health struggles. But the most damaging evidence was a video from 2 months ago where Blake directly talked about me. "My mom is like the perfect safety net," he said to the camera. "She's got plenty of money saved up. She's getting older, so she's not thinking as clearly as she used to. And she still feels guilty about my dad dying when I was a kid. It's honestly the easiest money I've ever made." Sitting there with all this evidence spread across my kitchen table, I realized that Blake hadn't just been stealing my money. He had been systematically planning to steal my entire life. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. Blake thought he was playing chess with a naive old woman, but he was about to discover that his mother hadn't survived 30 years as a single parent by being weak or stupid. I was going to beat him at his own game. But first, I needed to understand exactly what weapons I had at my disposal. My first call was to Robert's old lawyer, Harold Patterson, who had helped me with the estate when my husband died. Harold was in his 70s now, but his mind was still sharp as a tack. When I explained what Blake had been doing, his reaction told me everything I needed to know about how serious this situation was. "Dorothy, what you're describing is elder abuse," Harold said bluntly. "Financial exploitation of a senior citizen is a felony in this state. But more immediately, we need to protect your assets before Blake tries to use that power of attorney." Harold explained that I could revoke the power of attorney immediately, and that Blake's social media posts would actually work in my favor if he tried to claim I was mentally incompetent. "No judge is going to believe you're suffering from dementia when you've got documented evidence of your son's fraud," he assured me. Next, I called my bank and spoke with the manager, Janet Rodriguez, who I had known for 15 years. When I explained the situation, Janet was horrified, but immediately helpful. "Mrs. Henderson, we can move your money to new accounts today," she said. "And I want you to know that we take financial elder abuse very seriously here. We'll flag your old accounts and create alerts, so if anyone tries to access them, we'll know immediately." But I didn't just want to protect myself. I wanted Blake to face consequences for what he had done. Harold suggested documenting everything with a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud cases. "The more evidence we have, the stronger your position will be," he explained. That's when I called my best friend Betty Franklin and told her everything. Betty had been suspicious of Blake for months, she admitted. "I always thought it was strange how much money trouble he seemed to have when Tiffany was always posting pictures of expensive dinners on Facebook," Betty said. "I just didn't want to say anything because I thought maybe you were helping them out on purpose." Betty and I came up with a plan that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. We would test Blake's deception one final time, while I quietly secured my finances. I would call Blake with my own fake emergency, claiming I needed help with unexpected medical bills, and see how he responded. If Blake truly cared about me, he would offer to help his mother the way I had always helped him. If he was just using me for money, his reaction would expose him completely. Meanwhile, I would move my savings to new accounts Blake couldn't access, revoke his power of attorney, and gather evidence of his fraud. Harold had already started preparing paperwork to change my will, removing Blake entirely and establishing a trust for Austin's college education that Blake couldn't touch. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. I wasn't going to confront Blake with accusations or angry demands. I was going to give him enough rope to hang himself, then calmly present him with the consequences of his choices. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The scared, manipulated woman who had been sending money to her lying son was gone. In her place was someone Blake had never met before, a mother who was finally done being taken advantage of. Wednesday evening, I sat in my living room with Betty beside me for moral support, my phone in one hand and a glass of water in the other, because my mouth had gone completely dry. Harold had spent the day moving my money to new accounts and officially revoking Blake's power of attorney. Now came the moment of truth. I dialed Blake's number, and he picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" His voice sounded cheerful, probably because he thought I was calling with another financial rescue mission. "Blake, honey, I need to talk to you about something serious," I said, letting my voice shake just slightly. Over the years, I had learned exactly how Blake expected me to sound when I was scared or overwhelmed. I got some test results back from Dr. Martinez today, and they found something concerning. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Blake calculating how this might benefit him. "Oh no, Mom. What kind of test results? Are you okay?" "They found some irregularities that need immediate follow-up testing," I continued, sticking to the script Betty and I had rehearsed. "The problem is, my insurance is saying they won't cover the specialized scans Dr. Martinez wants to do. The hospital wants $4,800 upfront before they'll schedule anything." I waited, giving Blake the opportunity to offer help the way I had done for him countless times. A loving son would have immediately asked how he could help, would have offered to drive me to appointments or figure out payment plans. Instead, there was silence. "That's really tough, Mom," Blake finally said, and I could hear the irritation creeping into his voice. "Medical stuff is so expensive these days. Have you tried calling your insurance company to appeal their decision?" "I did, sweetheart, but they said it could take weeks for a review, and Dr. Martinez wants these tests done within the next few days." I paused, letting the desperation show in my voice. "I'm scared, Blake. I don't have that kind of money just sitting around, and I don't know what to do." What came next was the sound that confirmed everything I had discovered about my son. Blake sighed, a long, annoyed exhale that told me exactly how he viewed his mother's medical emergency. "Mom, I wish I could help, but you know things have been really tight for us lately. Tiffany and I are barely keeping our heads above water." The irony was so thick, I almost laughed. This was coming from a man who had posted a video just 2 days earlier showing off the $300 bottle of wine he and Tiffany had ordered at dinner. "I understand, honey," I said softly. "I just thought maybe you might have some suggestions. I'm really worried about waiting too long for these tests." "Well, what about that joint savings account we set up?" Blake asked suddenly, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "You could use some of that money for your medical expenses. That's exactly what it's there for." The joint account he was referring to was one Blake had convinced me to open 6 months ago, supposedly for family emergencies. Of course, the only emergencies it had ever funded were Blake's fake financial crises. He had been planning to use that account as his personal piggy bank, and now he was terrified I might actually access it. "That's a good idea," I said calmly. "I'll call the bank tomorrow and see about transferring some of that money for my medical bills." "Wait, no!" Blake's voice shot up an octave. "I mean, we should probably talk about that first. You don't want to just move money around without thinking it through. That account is supposed to be for emergencies only." "Blake," I said, letting my voice turn cold for the first time in our conversation. "My potential cancer diagnosis seems like an emergency to me. Unless you think your depression medication is more important than your mother's health." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Blake cleared his throat. "Mom, what are you talking about? What does my medication have to do with anything?" "Funny you should ask," I replied, reaching for Austin's phone where I had Blake's TikTok account pulled up. "I have some very interesting videos to share with you. Should I play them now, or would you prefer to come over so we can watch them together?" I could hear Blake's sharp intake of breath. "Mom, I don't know what you think you found, but—" "The yacht in Miami was particularly impressive," I interrupted. "Though I have to say, I preferred the video where you and Tiffany toasted to your Oscar-worthy depression performances and talked about how easy it is to get money from guilt-ridden mothers." The line went completely silent, except for the sound of Blake's ragged breathing. "Blake, are you still there?" I asked sweetly. "Because I have some wonderful news to share with you about your access to our joint account and that power of attorney you were so concerned about." Blake and Tiffany showed up at my house less than an hour after I hung up the phone. I was ready for them, sitting calmly at my kitchen table with printed screenshots of Blake's videos, arranged in neat piles alongside my bank statements and the revoked power of attorney documents. Betty had offered to stay for moral support, but I had sent her home. This was something I needed to face alone. They burst through my front door without knocking, both of them talking at once. Blake looked panicked, his face flushed and his hands shaking, while Tiffany wore an expression of pure rage that I had never seen before. The mask of the sweet daughter-in-law had completely disappeared. "Mom, you need to calm down and listen to me," Blake started, his voice taking on that manipulative, soothing tone I now recognized as his signature move. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about those videos. They're not what they look like." "Really?" I asked, picking up one of the printed screenshots. "So when you said I was the perfect safety net, because I'm not thinking as clearly as I used to, what exactly did you mean by that?" Tiffany stepped forward, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Dorothy, I think you're having some kind of episode. You're clearly confused about what you think you saw. Maybe we should call Dr. Martinez and have him check on your mental state." The threat was crystal clear. They were going to try to use my fake medical emergency against me, claiming I was having a mental breakdown. It was exactly the kind of calculated cruelty I had come to expect from them. "That's interesting, Tiffany," I replied evenly, "because I already called Dr. Martinez this morning. Turns out he never ordered any tests for me. Funny how that works." Blake's face went white. "Mom, please, just listen. Yes, I made some videos that I shouldn't have, but my depression is real. The TikTok thing was Tiffany's idea. She said it would help me cope with my anxiety to talk about our life online. I never meant for any of it to hurt you." I watched my son throw his wife under the bus without a moment's hesitation, and I felt the last piece of my heart that still believed in him finally break. Even now, caught red-handed in his lies, Blake was still trying to manipulate me. "Your depression might be real, Blake," I said quietly, "but your financial emergencies certainly weren't. $24,700. That's how much of my retirement money you've stolen over the past 2 years." Tiffany's composure finally cracked completely. "Stolen," she shrieked. "You gave us that money willingly. Nobody forced you to help your own son." "You're right," I agreed. "Nobody forced me. You just lied to me repeatedly, manipulated my emotions, and mocked me on social media for being stupid enough to believe you." Blake was starting to panic as he realized his usual tactics weren't working. "Mom, look, maybe I made some mistakes, but you can't just cut off your own family over this. Think about Austin. Think about what this will do to your grandson." It was the last card he had to play, and we both knew it. Using Austin as emotional leverage had always worked before, but not anymore. "I have thought about Austin," I said, standing up and walking to my filing cabinet, "which is why I've established a college trust fund for him that neither you nor Tiffany can touch. He'll have everything he needs for his education, but you'll never see a penny of it." I pulled out the new will Harold had prepared and set it on the table. "I've also removed both of you from my will entirely. My house and remaining assets will go to charity when I die." The room went dead silent. Blake and Tiffany stared at the documents like they were looking at a death sentence, which, in a way, they were. The death of their plan to eventually inherit everything I owned. "You can't do this," Tiffany whispered. "We're your family." "No," I said firmly. "Austin is my family. You two are just people who happen to share my son's DNA and decided to treat me like a fool." 6 months later, I was sitting on the small porch of my new townhouse in Sunset Gardens, a vibrant senior community about 20 miles from my old neighborhood. The morning sun was filtering through the oak trees, and I could hear my neighbor Margaret practicing piano through her open window. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The move had been Harold's suggestion. "Dorothy, you need a fresh start somewhere. Blake can't just show up whenever he wants," he had said. He was right. In my old house, I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for Blake and Tiffany to appear with new sob stories or threats. Here, I had a doorman, security cameras, and neighbors who looked out for each other. The community had welcomed me with open arms. Within a week, I had joined the book club, signed up for water aerobics, and started volunteering at the literacy center. These people knew me as Dorothy Henderson, the woman who made excellent apple pie and could beat anyone at Scrabble, not as somebody's marker meal ticket. Austin had been my biggest concern during the transition. Despite everything his parents had done, I couldn't bear the thought of losing my relationship with my grandson. To my surprise and relief, Austin had chosen to maintain contact with me, He came to visit every other weekend, just like before, taking the bus to my new community with the fierce independence of a teenager who had made up his own mind about right and wrong. During one of our recent visits, Austin had told me something that both broke my heart and filled me with pride. "Grandma Dot, I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Dad's videos sooner," he had said. "I knew it was wrong, but I didn't know how to stop it without hurting everyone." "Sweetheart, that wasn't your responsibility," I had assured him. "You were just a kid, caught in the middle of your father's bad choices." Austin had grown up a lot in these past 6 months. He had started working part-time at a local pizza place, saving money for college, and according to his teachers, his grades had actually improved since the family drama began. Sometimes children thrive when the adults around them stop pretending everything is fine. Blake and Tiffany had made a few attempts to reconcile, but their efforts felt as hollow as their original deceptions. Blake would call occasionally, usually when they were facing real financial pressure, trying different approaches to win me back. Sometimes he played the victim, claiming I had overreacted to a harmless misunderstanding. Other times, he tried guilt, reminding me that blood was thicker than water, and that families should forgive each other. I had learned to recognize these manipulations for what they were, and I responded to each attempt the same way, a polite but firm decline, followed by a reminder that my new phone number was only for people who genuinely cared about my well-being. The most meaningful change in my life had happened 3 months ago, when I started teaching a monthly workshop at the community center called Protecting Yourself in the Digital Age. Word had spread about my experience, and soon I was helping other seniors recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation, especially the kind that involved social media and fake emergencies. Last week, I had helped a woman named Ruth discover that her nephew had been using her credit card information to fund his gambling addiction, while telling her he was paying for his mother's cancer treatment. The week before that, I had assisted a man whose daughter had been stealing from his retirement account while claiming she was investing the money for his future care. Each person I helped felt like a small victory, not just for them, but for the woman I had become. I wasn't the naive, easily manipulated person Blake had taken advantage of. I was someone who had learned from her mistakes and was using that knowledge to protect others. As I sat on my porch this morning, watching the world wake up around me, I realized that Blake's betrayal had been the strangest kind of gift. It had forced me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed, and had freed me from a relationship that had been draining my spirit for years. The woman who used to lie awake, worrying about her son's fake problems, was gone. In her place was someone who slept peacefully, knowing that her money was secure, her grandson was thriving, and her life finally belonged to herself. Sometimes the most painful lessons teach us exactly what we need to learn about love, boundaries, and the difference between helping someone and enabling them to hurt us. I was 72 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was excited about what came next.